Hello, friends. Welcome back to another edition of the Lovecast with Jamal podcast. I am your host, Jamal Javanji. You're listening to episode 171, and we're going to call this one Disarming Echo Chambers Through Critical Thinking with educator William Reusch. Guys, how are you? I'm super excited to be back on the show with you. I have a guest that's getting ready to come on the show, and I did an interview with this guest. I was actually recommended to him by a friend of mine, and after checking out his site, I went to his Instagram site and instantly knew I wanted to have this person on his or on my podcast. William Reusch is an educator. He has been teaching civics and government in the Los Angeles public school system for a long time, and private schools around Los Angeles area. William is an interesting guy. When I saw his, I went to his website. I obviously have seen some of the work he's putting out on Instagram. He's got quite the following on Instagram, and I knew he had to be putting out really good stuff. And so I checked out some of his content and instantly knew this is a educator who is not just teaching for a job, but he is literally changing lives and teaching kids how to think. But not only that, I almost see him and the things he's doing as he's not just teaching kids in high school, which he is doing. I see him as an educator for the country, for America, and he has a lot to contribute and a lot to say about critical thinking and disarming echo chambers and helping us think beyond sectarian division. And he really is provocative. And to give you a little snapshot into the way he approaches things, I mean, as a civics teacher, you're required to teach about American government. Typically, you have a textbook. Well, William actually threw out his government issued textbook that he was supposed to be teaching to the kids because he found the textbook to be filled with inaccuracies or just omissions of really some of the corruption that goes on at the highest levels of our government. And he wanted to help educate kids about how the system actually works, not just the propaganda that we're constantly fed that is producing so much apathy in our population. So I was blown away with that, and I knew we would have a good conversation, and I had that conversation with William, and indeed it is really good, and I feel that it's very important. So I'm excited about bringing this conversation to you, and I would invite you to listen into this. Just a little bit about William, just so you know a little bit of who he is. He's actually born and raised in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and he's a graduate of Penn State University. He graduated in 2005 with his teaching, with a Bachelor of Arts in Secondary Education with a minor in history. Now, we didn't get into this on the show, but I'm a huge Buckeye fan from Ohio. Obviously, I love the Ohio State Buckeyes, so I won't hold it against William that he is a Penn State graduate. But nevertheless, the Buckeyes always prove their dominance on the football field, so we don't have to go there. But enough about that. I really just invite you to tune into this. We are coming up upon an election season here in just a couple of months. If you're active on social media, you know how divided our discourse is, how divided our country is. And I cannot emphasize enough the spirit that William approaches this conversation with, and some of the things that he's communicating here are really, really, really important for all of us to grasp. So my hope is that you will tune in, pay close attention to some of the things that he has to say in this episode. And also, just before we get into my conversation with William, I want to just say thank you to those of you who have rated and reviewed this podcast. That really does mean a lot, and it helps a ton. So if you've done that, you know who you are. If you're listening to this show, would you do me a huge favor, and would you go to iTunes, Apple iTunes or Apple Podcast, and rate and review this podcast? Just give us a rating and a review. It really does go a long way in helping the podcast gain visibility over time. So if you'll do that on Apple iTunes predominantly, or if you listen on Spotify, you can do it there on Spotify as well. But either way, that really helps a ton. And just thank you to those of you who have done that. We've had some great guests the last few weeks, and this week will be no exception. So without further ado, here is my conversation with William.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love just talking to different people and also just explaining kind of what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do, and things like that. So thank you for giving me a platform.
Absolutely. And as we talked about in the intro a little bit, so listeners are a bit familiar with who you are and what you're doing. But but I was really pointed to you. I had a friend of mine that just said, hey, there's a guy named Will Reusch who's, in Los Angeles in the education space, but really, really pushing the envelope and in conversation and in regards to how we think, our public discourse, helping obviously educate people on how to think. And I just was like, and as I mentioned to you earlier, when I saw some of your material and what you're putting out there in the world, I just thought that this is sorely needed. For a lot of reasons, but our country, our society, I just kept thinking, man, may your tribe increase. And I really love what you're doing. So it's invaluable. And honestly, I think our future really depends in many ways upon us understanding the heart of what you're trying to communicate and what you're trying to get across. So and I tell you what, it was in high school. It was a history teacher in high school that really got a hold of me, affected my life. I would not be sitting here in this position today, helping people doing what I do if it wasn't for my high school history teacher who really challenged common narratives in our classroom, helped us. It was the starting point of helping me learn how to think for myself. So you're doing this. You're an educator. You're a civics instructor. Do you teach high school or?
I do. I teach high school. Civics and government economics, but I've taught social studies. I've taught everything: world history, U.S. history, geography, sociology, all that. Yeah.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay. So I want to start maybe our conversation with a quote from you. And I love this. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about this before we get into your story, but it says, genuine curiosity is the key to acquiring knowledge and wisdom. In a world where individuals seem more and more certain and therefore uninterested in challenging their ideas, I take the opposite approach. I believe that education, whether in the classroom or in life, requires intellectual humility and a desire to expose the weaknesses in your ideas. I'm working to change the standard school model from one that exchanges information for compliance to one that uses imagination. I'm sorry, let me repeat that again. I am working to change the standard school model from one that exchanges imagination for compliance to one that uses imagination to innovate. School should not be a place where failure is avoided, but rather where it is embraced as a fast track to success. I love that. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. That's actually, I don't know where I said that so succinctly, because kind of all of my work is around that kind of mentality. I was teaching for some 13 or 14 years. And then I expanded onto social media just to kind of do what I was doing in the classroom, but for more people. And in doing that, I kind of developed these things I just call 3 pillars to kind of just keep in mind when I'm trying to engage with people on controversial issues and stuff. And it's intellectual humility, genuine curiosity, and grace. And I think that if you apply those things, I think that you can get a lot further in getting a better understanding of things. And so education is always what I'm always about. It's just learning about this world. This world is very complicated. There's so much to learn. So how do you go about doing that? And I think that, the first one of intellectual humility is just being aware that there's a lot that you don't know. We're all smart. We're all smart in certain areas, but we're also just vastly ignorant in a million different ways. So maybe there's something that you're missing. Even the areas where you are an expert in, you have blind spots. So recognizing that every interaction that you have with people, you could learn something. Genuine curiosity is just, I was never great at school. I wasn't dumb. or anything like that. But I always felt kind of ill-equipped in a lot of places. So once I was self-conscious about that. So once I embraced the fact that I didn't know things, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to ask a lot of questions. And it was a game changer, Jamal. Like once I realized, like, because we're so self-conscious about not knowing things. If I just lean into that, go, I don't know what that is. Can you tell me? Then I'm learning constantly. And so much of school actually punishes curiosity. You can ask questions and teachers get really mad at you for asking inconvenient questions and things like that. And you're just supposed to just do your work. And that never made sense to me. So I try to be very, very curious. If there's a great Abraham Lincoln quote, I don't like that man, I need to get to know him better. Like, I love that. It's like, what am I missing here? It's so good, right? So yeah, intellectual humility.
I don't like that man. I need to get to know him better. What in the world? That would be beautiful. A game changer. That's absolutely beautiful.
You know where I heard that for the first time? I teach government. I've been teaching government. This is my 17th year, but I have real issues with American government. And I went to my first political rally in 2022 or 2020 for a Democratic candidate named Tulsi Gabbard. And I was really impressed by her. And she got up. It was in downtown LA. She got up and she said that quote, and many like it. And I was like, wow, that's a really good, because it's 2020. You know, this was a big thing about, you know, Trump and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, intellectual humility, genuine curiosity, and then grace of just like recognizing that people probably mean well. They think of themselves as doing good, pausing on judgment. No, not just being so quick to be judgmental on people and declaring them as immoral and things like that. And those three things I try to apply. And the fact that I have some level of like public persona, like people are watching to some degree what I'm doing, especially people that don't like me. So I hold these standards for myself. And when people are like, well, that wasn't very gracious, or wow, you're not showing a lot of humility there. It's like, oh, that's a good point. So I want to hold myself to these standards as well, because it's what got me where I'm at, which is like, you know, getting better and better in my chosen profession of education. I use these things. So I put them out for other people because they might help, but I really apply them to myself. I'm a harsher critic of myself than I am with anyone else.
I love that. That's so spot on. And, you know, this touching on this idea of understanding that, you know, our humility of just realizing that we don't know everything. And not only that, to be genuinely curious. What I have found as a coach, sometimes when I'm working with people that are in conflict, right? Two parties are in conflict with each other. What I like to do sometimes is I'll say, okay, I know you don't agree with this person. I know this person doesn't agree with you, but can you repeat back what the other person that you're in conflict with, can you state back what their viewpoint is? What they believe and why they're opposed to your viewpoint. And I'm not saying you have to agree with it. I'm just saying, can you state it in a way that they would agree that you have correctly understood them? And it's usually, you know, they'll take a step back and I'll say, just say it as if you were them. Just do some role play here. Speak their position point, and they'll say, okay, here's what I think their position point is. And they'll like communicate what they think that other person's position point is. And then I'll ask that other person, I'll say, did they adequately articulate your position? And they're like, no, not at all. Not even close. Actually, if I had that view, I would disagree with myself. So what this shows is most disagreement is not really disagreement. We've simply heard the other party through our own filter or lens. And that means we haven't heard them correctly. So just by saying, hey, first, let's understand. I love that Abraham Lincoln quote. I don't like that guy. Let me understand him a little bit further, because how do you know? What if you just simply misunderstand their position? Now, if you understand their position, you can still disagree with it. But first and foremost, you have to understand it. And what if we did that in our political discourse today? First and foremost, because when I hear these conversations that are going on typically between left and right, I hear caricatures of each other's position, but I don't actually hear the left or the right articulating what they disagree with in those positions in a way that the other person will say, okay, yeah, that's actually what I'm advocating. So, and there's many examples we could use with that, but that's why I'm so blown away with your approach. I think it's so needed. Something in your bio that really jumps out to me is you say, "I disarm." This is in your bio on your website and social media. It says, "I disarm echo chambers through civil discourse and critical thinking." So a question I have for you is, can you talk a little bit more about like I think we hear the word critical thinking, but honestly, there's probably there's a very few of our, a small percentage of our population that probably engages in critical thinking. How would you define critical thinking? How do you understand that?
Oh man, now as an elevator pitch, yeah, it's tricky. I think it would just be picking apart the reasons why you think what you do. We wrote a curriculum, a math teacher a math teacher in Michigan and I, with a grant from Heterodox Academy, wrote a critical thinking curriculum. And it's a lot of just understanding why you think the way that you do. So there's all kinds of like moral dilemmas and stuff like that, but it's also understanding how the brain works and why it is that we look for the negatives in strangers as opposed to the positives, like going back to evolutionary biology and stuff like that. I should have just a good dictionary definition of it, but I just think that it's actually picking apart why you think what you think is critical thinking. Really thinking about, I use the definition now, I'm like Ibram Kendi, but really breaking down why you believe what you do, breaking down how you've established your ideas and things like that, and just contemplating on that and challenging it. It's constantly challenging the way that you think. Resistance makes you better. We know that. We know that physically with weightlifting and stuff. We know that with ideas. That's why the peer review system was established and stuff. So I think critical thinking is giving pushback, giving resistance to your ideas and the way that your thought processes work.
So good. So good. And I love that you're, and as your position as an educator in high school, that you're teaching kids how to actually, I had a professor in college and would do the same thing. And they said, "Hey, listen, I will never penalize you for any view you have in this class." He said, "But I will never allow you to present a view that you don't back up with how you got there." Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that. It's this idea of how did you come to this conclusion? And so you're really teaching people how to think critically, push back, answer, objections, things like that. So good. So good. I understand that you, as a teacher, at one point threw out your civics textbook for your class. Yeah. Can you talk about that? So first of all, I think that's revolutionary. Number one, that a teacher would take the textbook that is obviously mandated. Okay, this is what you need to teach the kids, and to say, you know what, I'm not teaching this. Talk about that. What led you to do that?
Yeah, so I made a video on that to explain, to prove a point. I still use elements from a textbook, but the issue that I have, and it's a big issue, is what the way the textbook lays out the structure and the workings of our government is the way it's supposed to work. It's the design of it, so it's like the structure of it. But that I still teach. But what's not covered in the textbook is things like the power of lobbying. They might talk about what lobbyists do, which is they just, meet with the lawmakers and they present different sides and stuff, but they don't talk about the money. They don't talk about, textbooks don't talk about things like regulatory capture. I mean, when you look at the amount, it's something like, 60% or something of the funding for the FDA comes from pharmaceutical companies. Like the fact that
60%
it's
of
something
the FDA.
like that. Yeah. I mean, you'd have to Google it, but it's more than it should be, because it should be zero,
basically a potential conflict of interest.
Yeah. Janet Yellen, who, Treasury Secretary, she spoke at Goldman Sachs for $500,000 and things like that. The people who are supposed to be regulating our capitalist system. Capitalism works, but there has to be regulations on it to keep it fair and safe and stuff like that. Keep it as, free, so to speak. The people who are supposed to regulate that aren't. And that's not covered in the textbook. So I spoke earlier about Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard was doing an interview. She said when she was a freshman congresswoman, the first day, they all come in, all the freshman Congress people come in, they're hanging out, Republicans, Democrats, whatever. And then right away, the kind of old guard. They go, okay, Democrats over here, Republicans over here, and they separate them. And then they say, look, the point of being in Congress is to get wins for your side, wins for your team. And she's like, excuse me, isn't it to make the country better for the American people? And they were like, oh, ha, ha, how ignorant. No. No, wins for our team. So even if there's a bill on the floor that we agree with, if it was proposed by a Republican, we shut it down. And clearly that is the case. That is the way things work. But that's not covered in a textbook either. So it's not going to serve my students for them to paint them this fairy tale image of the way the government works. Because my goal of teaching kids government is to get them to be civically engaged, to try and be involved in our government. And if they don't know the way it's actually played, then they're not going to be able to play it. And we're setting them up for failure. And I think that that's perhaps by design. Is the textbook, the way that government classes typically are taught is not really the way it works. I had a guy on my podcast who was running for the gubernatorial election for New York. And he's from the Libertarian Party, and he just posted something recently about how expensive it is to even just get on a ballot. It's like hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get on a ballot. And that's not covered in the textbook either. So if the kids don't know how much money plays a role in politics and stuff like that, then when they go, hey, I want to run for office someday, like they don't know even how to get there, then they're going to be like surprised at the fact that they have to raise all this money. And what do you have to do to raise that kind of money and things like that? So I want to paint them a real picture so that they can be civically engaged. So that's why I made the video. And that's why I'm so frustrated with the way the textbooks actually work. Because I had to go through that too. I was really frustrated hearing that from Tulsi Gabbard, seeing what's going on in the world today in politics. I got really frustrated because I was like, this is nowhere in the curriculum. This isn't in the state standards or anything. So why are we teaching something that's not actually the way it works?
So good. And I think what I've discovered is a lot of our disillusionment, the disillusionment of folks, right? That especially young folks, right? When it comes to civil discourse or even, being civically engaged, one of the reasons people are so discouraged is because we do hear the fairy tale stories in school, right? This is the democratic system, and our representatives are elected to government to represent the people and to do the people's bidding. But we don't hear, and because of that, that's this ideal situation that we're presented. And then when we see how it actually works or hear stories about how it actually works, we just become discouraged, become skeptical, we become disillusioned,
jaded, angry. Yeah.
But if we can hear, in order to go where you want to go, and this is true in all aspects of life, you got to see things as they are. You got to start with, okay, let's not bullshit ourselves, right? Let's be honest. What's actually happening? Okay, the ideal is, the founders designed the system in such a way that we elect representatives to Congress to represent the people. But here's what's happened because of a lack of oversight or a lack of taking these oversight positions seriously. We have folks FDA is a great example, right? We have an organization that's supposed to keep the people safe from food and drugs that are harmful. However, the folks that are leading it and the organization itself is being funded by companies that have a vested interest in getting their products to market that are not safe and may not be safe for people. So that's a reality. Or love the Tulsi Gabbard story. She gets elected to Congress, and day one they say, "Hey, let's correct if you may come here on. You have great ideas and you have great intentions, but let's just be real. You're here to represent your party. Not if the other party proposes something good, can't be good because it's the other party. So you're just going to be oppositional. It's not about governing. It's about being oppositional." So I love that you're telling the kids, this is unfortunately the way it is right now. And we can change it, but you can't have your head in the sand about the way it actually is.
And I use examples like Mitt Romney voted to impeach Trump. So then he was ousted by the Republicans. And then Liz Cheney, same thing. And then Tulsi Gabbard chose Bernie Sanders, gave her support to Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was like the party person. So they ousted Tulsi Gabbard. And so this is not, I'm not on one side or the other. I just don't I'm not buying into this binary partisan nonsense of Democrats and Republicans. I am neither proudly politically homeless when it comes to the parties, because they both play the same game. They both are playing the same game and then call out the other side when they do these gross tactics while they're doing the gross tactics. And that's really frustrating them all too, because what happens is in media, the right, more like conservative news sites like Fox News, Breitbart, Ben Shapiro, Crowder, any of them, they call out the bad actors on the left. And then on the left, whether it's like CNN or The View or whatever it is, okay, they are calling out the bad actors on the right, the bad elements of the right, where what we should be doing is calling out the bad actors within our own party. So if you're a Democrat, you should be like, hey, this is really gross the Democrats are doing right now. But I think they see it as it'll weaken their position. I think that's just a miscalculation. I don't think it's this is probably something that would apply to you as a life coach. It's like, shouldn't you be aware of your downfalls and your like shortcomings more so than the people who are critical of you? Like that's a strategy for success to go, look, I know I'm doing these kinds of bad things and I'm working on fixing them. Because if you don't recognize those, then they're going to use that as a way to attack you. And it's so strange that in politics, it's the opposite. I get the news about the bad stuff in the Democrats only from the right. And vice versa, where they should be calling out their own. They think it's going to weaken them. And I couldn't disagree more. I think that strengthens you. I think when you call out yourself and say, hey, I'm really acting gross right now, people start to trust you. They go, oh, wow, you're self-aware and you're trustworthy now. You're honest.
Totally. And what I've also discovered is when there's a paradigm of, and this is where fear can really mess with us, because if we look at the world, and I spent years looking at the world this way, as us versus them, good versus evil. And I know there are a lot of destructive things happening in the world. I totally get that. But when I primarily see things through this primitive lens of good versus evil, nobody ever sees themselves as the evil, by the way. So we then look at out there and go, well, where's the enemy? So instead of having a disagreement with somebody, they have to be the enemy. And the language we're using around this is, they're going to tear apart the Democrats. They're trying to tear apart the country. The liberals, they're destroying the country. The right wingers, they're going to make us all into Nazis. Or this is going to be, whatever the language. But we're really demonizing. We've lost sight of the humanity of these other folks, even though we could vehemently disagree with what they stand for or what they're doing, but we've lost sight of the humanity of them. And that's where I think we're losing it, because we feel threatened. When in reality, if we can understand, like, actually, what if we just assume that we all want what's best? Now, we may disagree on what we think is best, but let's just assume that we want what's best. Let's just assume that, even if it's naive first, let's just assume we all want what's best for this country. There was something noble that has led each person into wanting into government even. And now I know there'll be a lot of pushback with that. People say, no, this is all about power and greed and all that kind of thing. That's easy to do that, though. It's easy to make those assumptions. But my understanding, I used to be a corrections officer. I worked in a state penitentiary for almost 5 years. And, obviously you witness people at their worst and you witness very, violent behavior and that kinds of things. But it took me almost 5 years of working in a prison before I came to the conclusion that at the core of people, that people are actually good. And that challenged my thinking, because I used to think that some people were just inherently evil, that they're just throwaway. There's really no, but I started to see that no, what we're talking about, what we call quote unquote sin, or what we call as evil, I like a better word for it is sickness. There is trauma, there's pain. And when you get below that pain, there's a human being there. And this is kind of a spiritual principle I talk about, but even in the Bible, it says that human beings were created in the image and likeness of God at the core level. So if I can see this other human being that I may be in disagreement with at the core of who they are, there's a divine image there, as hard as it may be to see. If I can understand that, then it's no longer about opposing them, or it's about let's discover. There is an opportunity to discover where our agreement is and where if there's a better way. We can come together and find some solution. But because if I'm in oppositional energy, it's going to be really hard to do that. And I heard a story recently where actually a guy I've been talking with, he was a contemporary of MLK Jr., Martin Luther King Jr., and he's 91 years old today, still alive. He knew Dr. King's father, and he said Dr. King's father is this he's not really, nobody really knows about him. He said, but think about him for a moment. He's like, he lost his son. His wife was actually murdered. I didn't know this. His wife was murdered. MLK's Jr.'s mother was murdered in, I think, 1974 or something by an assassin. And the political figure of that day of the 50s and 60s was a guy named George Wallace, who was the governor of Alabama. He ran for president on a segregation ticket. Mm-hmm. And he's the one that famously said, "Segregation now, segregation forever." Well, he was there was an assassination attempt on him, and he was injured, and I think he was confined to a wheelchair. And in late 70s, MLK Jr.'s father was still living. Now he's a widow, and he's lost his son. Suffered immensely from the divided political, personally, he suffered from this divided political environment we have ourselves in. And he was speaking at a church in somewhere in, I think it was Georgia or maybe Alabama. At the time, this was in a town where George Wallace, the segregationist former governor, was living, and he went and visited him. He asked if he could go visit him, and George Wallace said yes. He went to his home. He's now confined to a wheelchair, George Wallace, and he said, "I know you probably don't consider me your brother." He said, "But you are my brother. Whether or not you consider me your brother, I see you as my brother. I always have, and I always will. And I'm sorry of what you're going through and what you're experiencing right now." And George Wallace was speechless, didn't know what to say. So he left. MLK Jr.'s father left, went back to his church to speak at this event. And he was notified about 30 minutes after the service started that there was a guy, it was the former governor, George Wallace, the segregationist, the guy who was avowed racist, wanted to come into the church. They wheeled him in, and he said, "I don't want to take up your time or interrupt." He said, "But I would like to speak for a few minutes." So they wheeled him to the front of the church. He turned around and he goes, "Look at me. I'm a shell of the person I used to be. I'm suffering." He said, "But it's a drop in the hat in comparison to the suffering that I've caused you. And if you could find it in your heart to forgive me, I ask for your forgiveness." And they did. They extended forgiveness. And all of that, this was a picture of, this would be I don't even know what the example would be today, but extreme left, extreme right, coming together in that moment. And all of that was made possible just simply because one man, MLK Jr.'s father, saw the humanity of a avowed racist and didn't play into the us versus them thing.
That's a beautiful story. There's a great book by Arthur Brooks called Love Your Enemies, which I actually make as required reading for my civics class over the summer. Lots of stories from that. But it's kind of like the concept in the Bible of hate the sin, love the sinner, right? Do you remember that, Roof it was a mass shooter who went to the black church. It was like a messed up white kid who sat in the back of the church for the whole service, then shot up the church. And at his hearing, when he was getting he was going to get his penalty, handed down from the judge or the jury, all of the victims' family members came on. They were on remote, on a screen. And one after the other said, "I forgive you. You stole my baby." These are the parents of children who were killed, and the children of elderly people, women who were killed. And they were like, "We forgive you. We forgive you. God will forgive you. It's, you did some horrible things, but we forgive." It was oh my gosh. I had Daryl Davis on my podcast. Are you familiar with him? Daryl Davis? Daryl Davis, interesting guy. He's a jazz piano player, brilliant piano player, played with a Chuck Berry and stuff like that. But he was playing in Maryland and years and years ago. And this guy came up and said, "Hey, I want to buy you a beer." And he sat down. He's like, "I never knew black guys could play rock and roll like this." What? All right. And then he said something else where he's like, "I've never had a beer with a black guy before." And Daryl's like, what's going on? And his friend goes, "Hey, show him. So then the guy pulled out his card. It was a membership card to the KKK. He's a member of the card-carrying member of the KKK. And Daryl started there and started to engage him in conversation, and then met with him and then the grand dragon or wizard or whatever it is of the KKK at this like bar. And he started to form friendships with members of the Ku Klux Klan. As a black man, he went to Klan rallies where they're burning crosses and stuff, engaged them in friendship. And then years go by, and this grand wizard came up to him one day, like, I'm gonna come over to your house. He came up and he handed him a box. And Daryl opened the box, and inside that was his Ku Klux Klan robe. And Daryl's like, what is this? He goes, I don't want it anymore. He's like, I'm done. I'm done. You got me out. And since then, they worked together. And Daryl Davis has gotten over 250 members of Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazi groups to leave the life out of becoming their friend. That's how he did it. He didn't shame them. He didn't shut them down. He engaged them in conversation. They saw the humanity. He saw the humanity in them, and they saw the humanity in him, and he got them out of the life. It's so powerful. And those stories I had in my podcast, and I was talking to him about this, like it just opened my eyes up. Like, if you can do that with Ku Klux Klan members, you can't do that with your dad who wears a MAGA hat. Like, what is going on here? This is wild, you know. Wow. And I'm not a moral relativist, Jamal. Like, I'm not saying that there aren't bad things. I have a friend who's a therapist, and she works with two groups of people: convicted pedophiles and children victims of sexual abuse. And when she told me this, I was like, so wait, you like are a therapist to convicted pedophiles? And she's like, yeah. And I made a joke, something like, how do you do that? Just like give them a gun and a bullet? And she said, well, how many of my clients who are convicted child, rapists and things like that, how many of them do you think were horribly sexually abused themselves? I was like, yeah. I don't know. She's like, 100%.
100%.
From her experience. So she's like,
totally.
What they do is they're monsters, but they're created monsters.
Yes.
So you can say what they do is horrible. It's the same thing. Hate the sin, love this. You say what they did and what they do is horrific, but they are broken people. They're sick people. And when you see them that way, you don't excuse their behavior, but you can hopefully love them through this somehow. And I think that's just a better approach. It's a better approach. Still penalize them, still keep them away from my kids, but we can hopefully take that approach with each other. We can do that with pedophiles. We can do that with Ku Klux Klan members and neo-Nazis. And we can do that with people who shot your family. Then how dare you not do it for someone who doesn't vote like you?
We can do it for Republicans and Democrats.
Right? It's absurd that we couldn't.
That's so powerful. So well said. Amazing. Yeah. And again, it's seeing people beyond their psychological constructs or their persona, because I always tell people, I've never met a Republican or a Democrat. Is that like a new species? It's like, well, tell me, is the DNA different? This is just a mental identity that we've created, a construct. And the problem that comes in is when we identify with something other than our humanity. Because at the end of the day, what are we? We're human beings.
Yeah.
That will never be anything other than that. When we were born, no Democrat or Republican is ever born. All the newborns are human beings. It doesn't actually change. So I think that's such a great point you're making. And again, if we can create that distance between somebody's positions, even somebody's behavior, and them, their true self, that's a game changer. I'm curious though, however, like how did this awakening happened for you? Did you grow up in a family that emphasized these ideals? How did you get passionate about the truth, developing critical thinking skills, and then wanting to get into education? Tell me about the backstory behind all of this.
I was very much in one side. Those are bad. This is the right way to live. With the way they live is the wrong way to live, all that kind of stuff. But I was born in Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania, kind of blue collar town. And I just wanted something more. So a friend of mine moved out to LA to become a stand-up comedian. I came out to visit him during spring break, my junior year of college. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. Driving the PCH and stuff. I was like, this is beautiful. I guess anyone can move here. That's crazy. So I moved out here just looking for something. I didn't know what it was yet. Some sort of sense of adventure, I suppose. And I met my wife, who is a Filipino immigrant came to this country with almost nothing, but had a real like entrepreneurship, like go-getter kind of approach, and fell in love and got married and had kids and stuff like that. But she is more conservative. I was always more like left-leaning politically. She is more conservative because of where she came from and the way that her ideals are structured around business and around, like pick yourself up by your bootstraps type of stuff. And I met her family, who were like card-carrying Republicans. And I was like, wow, they're not greedy. They open their home up to homeless people and victims of all kinds of like, illnesses and stuff. They're so generous. I was like, that's not the narrative that I got about Republicans. And it just, when you interact with people of different cultures, it's weird because it's not just language. It's not just the food you eat. It's your senses of morality. It's like raising kids. Is it better to do this or this? Like, how often should you work? And how much attention should you give to this and that? And my wife and I had to work that out. Like it was very difficult to marry outside of your culture, completely outside of your culture, because you got to try and figure out what do you want to get rid of the way that you were brought up, and what does she want to get rid of the way she was brought up, and what's really valuable from the way she was and I was. So that was the starting point. And then it was also that opened my eyes up to the way that I was raised, which was very clear, like the way my parents, and they're good people and they're lovely people. And I was raised in a very loving home, but it was very much like, this is the way that you parent. This is the way that you work. This, like the way that this is the way you dress. This is the way you behave. The way that those people do it is wrong. And I challenged them then, and then it became a rift in our family. And then it was like, well, I don't want to have these rifts in my family. Like I challenged them, and it caused like us to separate a little bit. And I was like, I don't want that. How do I heal these wounds within our family? So that's how I learned about all like how do you communicate across divides and stuff. It's very internal. It's like taking my own kind of issues and then going through a process and then sharing that process with other people. So it was like, now I have a lot better relationship with my family members because I've learned how to communicate with them and understand that the way that they think doesn't make them wrong, and I can do it in a way that they don't feel threatened by. So it was very much just like taking your own kind of whatever issues, your own whatever it is, your past trauma, and you kind of work on that, and then that makes you wiser, and then you can share that process with others. So that's really how it happened. It just happened to be our first son was born in 2014. So that's right around the time, 2014, 2015, 2016 was really like the time that it was all kind of happening in politics too. So it was like a rift in my family was happening as the country seemed to be really rifting or breaking apart with like Trump and everything. And then it was like, oh, this is happening in my personal life and in the country. So it was like right alongside. It just happened to be perfect. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to try and heal my family, and I can apply the same thing to try and put it out to my class and then on social media on how to heal the country divide. It just happened to work out that way.
Amazing. And I think your story is, I think that a lot of folks, well, what is a collective discourse? The collective discourse we're having is really just an expression of our internal discourse, and also of what's happening in our own families, right? So it's a collective consciousness is just individual consciousness magnified. I always say peace. If we're gonna have peace, it's gonna have to start within us. So good. I wanted to ask you, just curious to hear your observation on. Let's talk about, because you mentioned, this transition was happening in your own personal family life. At the same time, it was happening in the country with the introduction of Donald Trump, 2016. What is your understanding of the Trump phenomena? Like, what is this? What's happening here?
Yeah. Thanks for asking this, because, Trump is so, it's so polarizing. I think a lot of people don't see Donald Trump clearly. I think the like people who are loyal to him, I think he was right when he said, like, I could do anything. I'd shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they don't care. I think he's spot on about that. There are those. And then the other side, the people who oppose him can't see him clearly. You could say, like, name 3 things that Trump did that were good. And they're like, nothing. It's like, got better access for people for dialysis treatment. He did prison reform. He gave extra funding to HBCUs. Those are 3 things. That's not good. Because they just can't see him clearly. I think no one can, or very few, but I think I do. because I've tried so hard to challenge all these different narratives. I think it's a combination of a couple of things. I think a lot of it is the working class, especially white working class, truck drivers, factory workers, people in the Rust Belt who are out of work and stuff like that. We're kind of starting to be vilified by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, this is an idea of an economist named Pia Milani. And she said, the Democratic Party used to be the party of the working class, the Labor Party. And then in the 1990s, they were getting killed in elections because the donations were just so much greater for the Republicans, because the CEOs of these companies and stuff like that were going to donate to the Republicans. They're not going to donate to the party that says, hey, we're going to get you better working conditions and more pay, because that's bad for business. So they were just getting outfunded. So then in the mid 90s, the Democrats said, all right, we got to kind of abandon the working class to some degree. So they went from being the party of the working class to the party of identity. And if you're the party of the working class, you have to deliver. You have to deliver difficult things that are going to affect business and stuff like that, and the wealthy elite. So, but if you are the party of identity, and all you have to do is just like take a knee or say like, I love you because you're Hispanic, and that's it. That's all you have to do is just recognize people. Like, I recognize you, trans person. That's it. If you do that, then that was like their play. And that we see that so clearly now. It's the party of identity. Why is Kamala, if you ask someone who loves Kamala Harris and so really happy that she's in office, ask them why, and it can't have anything to do with her immutable characteristics. Like, it's not a good sell, especially when you look at her record of locking up, single moms and people for marijuana charges and stuff like that. So they became the party of identity. And this whole, that was right around the time of the concept of privilege and all the stuff in critical theory, not to be confused with critical thinking, but critical theory of looking for problems where they may or may not exist. So, a lot of the racial stuff and all that kind of stuff was really ramping up 2014, 2015. And I think a lot of white working class, I talked to a lot of them, white working class men especially, but white working class people said, I talked to a guy from South Carolina. He's like, I know that Trump is a Yankee. I know that he was a guy with gold toilets in Manhattan, but you know what? He didn't say I was a bad guy. He recognized me as being a decent person. And that's enough for me, because I don't want to feel vilified. I get up every day at 4 a.m. I drive a truck. I come home stinking like garbage. I'm working in the sewers and stuff. And to be told that I have privilege, get out of here. That's ridiculous. So I think there's that element. And then I think that's a big part. And then I think the other big part about Trump is he is anti-elite, which is odd because he's a billionaire who takes dumps on gold toilets. But the thing with Donald Trump, when you know his story, is he was raised in that uber elite Manhattan world with prep schools and stuff like that, but he was never accepted. He was kind of always like a buffoon. He was always kind of laughed at among the super elite, like kids in his grade, even like when he was young. So he was never taken that seriously as a businessman, even though he was successful and as a businessman, but he was never really taken seriously. So he leaned into media. He leaned into Hollywood. So all of that kind of stuff, because he was like a joke. So of the elite who stay out of the spotlight. So he went into the spotlight and gained recognition that way. And because of that, when he got in this position of power, the elite came after him. The wealthy, Upper West Side Manhattan people, they don't like Donald Trump. They don't like him, okay, because they never did. And so he calls them out. And I think that, again, a lot of the common people, the average working class people, they don't like the super elite either. They don't like the Nancy Pelosi's and Mitch McConnell's and stuff like that of the world. So the fact that Trump is calling out these uber elite, they like that as well. They like the fact that he was saying stuff. He's like a populist. Apparently he came up with his ideas for his platform by tweeting, and then whatever would get the most retweets would be part of his platform. So he said something about build the wall that got the most retweets. So he's like, all right, build the wall it is. It's very much like a populist approach. And I think that a lot of just average people in the flyover states go, all right, I guess this is our guy, because he's at least saying that we're not terrible. And he's calling out the hypocritical, Martha's Vineyard elite as gross. So those two things, I think that's the Trump thing.
Totally. Okay. So what I'm hearing you say
that was a lot.
No, thank you. Thank you. That's, thank you for sharing. What I'm hearing you say is the Trump phenomena. Obviously there is a group of people that would, like I said, they're so devoted to him that he could shoot somebody that wouldn't change. But I was struck because in 2008, with the election of Barack Obama, there was a lot of people that supported him from all across. I mean, it wasn't just, there was people that were inspired that came from all different backgrounds. And what's interesting, in 2016, 8 years later, many of those same people, and this doesn't get reported on in the media, many of the same people that elected Barack Obama elected Donald Trump. And you may look at that and go, how are these two figures even remotely alike? Well, Barack Obama promised to be different, to be the unelite hope and change. Mm-hmm. So there's a real swelling of the populace that are saying, look, we don't really know what a lot of things, but what we do know is that this caste system in which there's an upper echelon and this elite kind of political class has not served us, is not serving us well. And we reject that. And so in 2008, Barack Obama was the candidate to oppose that. In many ways, a lot of folks consider it after 8 years, they go, well, he's no different. He's actually a part of it. Yeah. And then in 2016, those same folks said, well, this guy's an outsider who's thumbing his nose at the elite. So what I'm hearing you say is that really the Trump phenomena is really less about Donald Trump as a person per se, as much as it's about we are rejecting the status quo elite kind of political class that's been running both parties in this country.
Yeah, and when the New York Times and CNN and ABC News and all college professors, the people who run these institutions, the most powerful people on the planet, are really, really against the idea of Donald Trump getting power. I think a lot of people go, why? Yeah, what are you so scared of? Like, why are you so scared of this guy getting power? You're scared that you're going to lose your power, and you would lose your power to whom? Because MAGA, whatever that is, they don't have a strong foothold in major institutions. They just don't. Like, you could say that, whatever, alt-right people are the biggest danger to, American society, but that's who is in charge of anything like major that would be considered MAGA. They don't have the power to be, or racism or racist white men are like the real danger to society. Like, I just don't think they have the power to do anything that dangerous because they just don't have the institutional power. I think a lot of people were really upset that Barack Obama was talking about change and then nothing really changed. And, whistleblowers like Snowden and was the other guy, from WikiLeaks? Julian Assange. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He locked them up. He continued the droning and everything like that. Had a very secretive, administration, and people just go, oh, so he's the same thing, just with like a different like cover, like the same phone, just a different phone cover because he has like black skin. Oh, that sucks. So we need something very different to really throw a wrench into this system that seems to be, like you said, like a caste system. It seems to be we're really cut up into like upper class and then like the rest of us. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. People are rejecting that.
Totally. No, thank you for sharing. Yeah. Well, okay. Here's something I wanted to ask you. Yeah. Okay, so 2020 was a pivotal year in many ways, socially, globally. Lots of things have changed. The way we interact as a society, the way we perceive work, politics has changed. What, in your observation of looking back on 2020, now that we're a couple years removed here, what do you think was happening? What was your perception? What did the events of 2020 really reveal in your understanding?
Well, first of all, with COVID, COVID hitting was, and now the CDC is admitting it, and things I think are going to get revealed with the people who were in charge, whether, through the NIH and, Fauci. And I think it's going to get revealed that there was some things going on here. And I think that it shows that our institutions are just not run by the best and brightest. Jamal, I teach high school, and I've taught in like the hood of like East LA. I've taught in West LA. I've taught like, rich, wealthy kids and wealthy, powerful, families, and, homeless kids and stuff like that, and gangbangers and stuff. There is brilliance everywhere. There are some brilliant gangbangers with tattoos on their neck that if they were just born in Marin County or something, they'd be an engineer at Google. Those kids are real, and they're not that rare, actually. And what's happened is, we're gonna stack the deck in favor of our own children. So I'm gonna bend the rules if I can to make sure my kids get more advantages than your kids. I just will. I mean, I might not say that out loud, but the truth is that's just the way it is. You're going to look out for your kids. You're going to give them advantages. So what happens is people in these elite positions, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to, ask their uncle to pull some strings, get them into a university, get them an internship, and then they rise up. I have friends who work on Wall Street, and the reason they got into Goldman is because their uncle worked for Goldman, not because they were the best and brightest. So what happens is you have the people running these institutions who aren't the best and brightest. They're just the ones who are the most well-connected, well-networked. And when the proverbial shit hits the fan, pardon my language, then these people are just ill-equipped because they shouldn't be there. The way that our country was established through these Enlightenment principles is let's get the best and brightest, the top experts into the positions where they can do their thing. And we're not there. We make excuses. We do all kinds of, affirmative action. I'm not even talking about just racial affirmative action. Nepotism is a form of that as well. And we're doing that. I think 2020 revealed that. And so our pandemic response, it revealed how polarizing we're going to get. When COVID first hit, I was like, oh, we need a war. We need something to unite us. I thought COVID would be the thing to unite us. And right away, no, partially because Trump was in charge at the time and Trump was so polarizing. So whatever he said, it had to be the opposite. So he said, maybe it's a lab leak. So then, no, you can't say lab leak. Or he said something about, how, natural immunity is a good thing. So then, all the social media companies made hashtag natural immunity blocked. So it revealed this thing of the elites trying to control us in one way or another. Here in California, our governor was doing some really crazy things. My wife's business had to get shut down. My friends' jujitsu schools had to get shut down. And looking back, I mean, even Johns Hopkins did a report that the shutdowns caused more harm than good. And there's, so I think it revealed that the people who are in charge probably shouldn't. It revealed that people are going to be power hungry when they can. And it also revealed that we're going to just find ways to be at each other's throats. And I think that that's a real concern, going back to what we were talking about earlier. There's so much that came out of 2020, and it was really disappointing. I think it could have been an opportunity for unity, and it went the other direction.
So well said. Thank you. Yeah. And one of the things that I've had in some of the conversations I've had is two things can unify us: tragedy, calamity, which is one, or a common vision. Mm-hmm. And if it's a common vision, we don't need an enemy. So I guess, maybe we can wrap up with this question. What vision, what are you seeing? What gives you hope for the future?
The channels, look, I'm on Instagram, and Instagram is notoriously gross and toxic and terrible. And I had a conversation with John Haidt, who I love and is a huge influence on everything that I do. He wrote a book called The Righteous Mind. The subtitle is Why Good People Are Divided by Religion and Politics. But he's like advocate. He talks to heads of state and all that kind of stuff. And he's saying how Instagram is really terrible. And it's terrible especially for young people and stuff. And I was talking to him, I grabbed my phone and I was like, John, let me just show you something. I was like, here's what I do. And I showed him what I do on my Instagram. And I said, so here's someone that was mad at me for something that I posted. And here's what I did. And I picked up my phone, I made a video, and I said, hi, Bob or whatever. I'm Will. I'm a real person. Okay. I must have said something that upset you. I'm sorry. It must be a miscommunication. Can we talk about it? Can we try and figure this out? So what gives me hope is that technology channels, we're like cavemen who just were handed a machine gun. We're like apes that are just handed this crazy technology. We don't know what to do. So we're just shooting everything. And we're kind of devolving into like the most primitive nature of ourselves. So it's like people falling down and boobs and butts and all that kind of stuff because we're not really sure what to do. Everyone has a voice now. So someone cuts you off in traffic, you can rant into your phone, or you get a fly in your burrito at Chipotle, you can take down Chipotle because you have a voice now. People feel very powerful who never felt powerful before. But these channels can unite. I mean, you and I found each other through channels on social media. You know, I've made good, like real friends through here, through these channels. And that gives me hope. I think it's growing pains. We're still figuring this out, but there is a beautiful way to use technology. Yes. I'm good at my job of teaching. I'm bad at most things, but I'm good at relaying information to young people, especially in simple ways. And if I want to teach as many kids as possible, traditionally that would be, 5 classes of 25 each. So we get 125 kids. That's my max. But if I can bring my stuff to online, if I can put stuff on Reels or on TikTok or whatever, and I get 10,000 people listening to it, then my idea is instead of going to 125 people that'll go out into the world, the ripple effects of that, instead of like a pebble, it can be a boulder and the ripple effects. So it's not just me, it's what you're doing, Jamal. It's what a lot of people are doing is the impact you can have of good can win using these technology platforms if we can use them that way. So that gives me hope. The fact that we have a voice now, that censorship doesn't work like it used to, that the old guard, the Mitch McConnells and Nancy Pelosi's don't understand why they can't just lie to our faces anymore. It's like, nah, we have video right here. You can't say that things are good when I have the data right in front of me. So technology gives me a lot of hope. It really does. I just think that we're going through a rough time because we're not sure how to use it yet. The apes are just figuring out now, like, oh, this is a trigger. That's a bad thing. That's the dangerous end. We're kind of figuring that out now. So that gives me hope, though, that we'll figure it out.
Totally. Well, I love that. I absolutely love that. Technology in the hands of the unconscious can be destructive, but technology in the hands of consciousness is powerful. And I think you're a great example of that. I also think I love that you're teaching kids, first of all, in the classroom. Beautiful. But I see you as a teacher for our society, for our country. You've expanded your teaching through technology, and we need that. We absolutely need it. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. That's because that's my aim. When you have an aim, you're like, here's what I'm trying to do. This is what I'm trying to do. And then people recognize you for doing that thing for them. That's really meaningful. So thank you.
Of course. Well, you have a podcast. It's called Cylinder Radio. Is that correct?
Yeah. Cylinder Radio. The idea is like that just looks. I know we just have it's just audio, but like if you look at like a tube, from one side it's just a circle, from the other side it looks like a rectangle, but it's actually 3-dimensional. So you take any kind of controversial issue, and we've covered it all. I've had 8 different transgender people on. I've had an abortion doctor, a pro-life feminist. I've had every immigration. I've talked about every issue from all these different angles to get people to go, oh man, this stuff is complex. But it is. So let's be a little humble. Let's try and figure this out together. And so it's all about that. It's all about having these conversations about nuance of controversial issues. Cylinder Radio. Yeah.
So good. Awesome. Well, where can people get in touch with you and your work?
Yeah. I mean, I have a website. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me would be through email on the website. Cause I have an Instagram. It's just my name, WILLREUSCH. But like DMs and stuff like that, they get lost. They get, it's really wonderful. It's a good problem to have because I have like 100 people a day that want to tell me stuff and sending me things. It's really nice, but I can't get to all that.
Sure.
But I can get to email. So email, if you want to get a hold of me, probably be the best way. But if you want to kind of see my work, my Instagram is probably the biggest point. I do have a YouTube channel, but that's smaller and I don't post on that as much. I post on Instagram every day. So it's probably the best place to get familiar with.
Instagram's probably great. And then of course links to your website and all that's on Instagram.
It's on there. Yeah. It's on the bio. Yeah.
So at Will Reusch.
Yeah.
WILLRO REUSCH. Okay. And I'll put that in the show notes as well. So we'll have that. Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you again for being on the show. So my recap, what I'm taking away, I'm taking a lot away from this conversation. I know the listeners will as well, but I just love what you said also in the beginning, the three kind of pillars, right? So let me make sure I get this right. Humility, right? Genuine humility. Is that what it was? Is that
intellectual humility?
Intellectual humility.
Yeah, like
we don't know everything.
Yeah, not just humility about like your physical characteristics and stuff like that, but like actually your ideas, your intellect. Yeah.
Yeah. So intellectual humility, genuine curiosity. Is that correct? And the last one was
grace.
Extending
grace to people. I love that word.
If we can just take those three, right? Grace meaning, hey, everything we have, we received, right? That's my understanding of grace. Is like, hey, everything has come to me.
Yeah.
Life, I didn't create my life. I didn't do this. Like life came to me, and I'm experiencing life. So whatever we have freely received, we can freely give. That's to me an understanding of grace.
I love that.
Intellectual humility and genuine curiosity. If we will take those three, I don't know that we can have enemies.
Yeah, the only people that I would see as like enemies to me are the ones who refuse to engage with me.
Sure.
All the people that I disagree with, like, Nicole Hannah-Jones and Ibram Kendi, like they've all blocked me. But I was just asking them simple questions and wanted to have a conversation. The only people that I don't get along with are the ones who refuse to talk.
Mm-hmm.
That says something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Absolutely. And internally, I always say an enemy, other people may be hostile towards us, but internally, if there's no hostility, there's no hostility. True. There's peace. And that's where peace is, it's internal there. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you again for your work. And I know that this is going to be of service to the listeners here. And I hope to continue the conversation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I enjoyed it as well.
Awesome. Well, take care. And guys, thanks for listening. Until next time. Bye-bye.